big question here on Friday, and we're asking, are MLS roster rules making the league more interesting? You may know him from his Substack, Football Analytics, or his work at Backheeled and Hex Podcast. Morning Kick Around is happy to welcome forecast analyst Armen Kafai to the program. Good morning, sir. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm rocking my Portland Heart of Maine jersey, even though I haven't been to both Portland, Oregon or Portland, Maine. But it's like, it's Kid Friday, so I had to rock
you
it.
look great, Armen. You look great. You're showing us up. I love that kid. That is a thing of beauty.
I
I gotta
have
get my
both.
hands on it.
I have both, which is really funny. So I think it's one of the only teams I have both in the same season. I don't know why. I just
Yeah,
really liked it. So
that one is hit for sure. That Portland Hearts of Pine. Yeah, good to have you on the show. Reached out because Armen is writing some interesting things over on his Substack about MLS roster rules, as you described, Rob. And the first thing that got me interested in having Armen on the show is a piece he wrote on the NBA-ification of MLS. He said continuing, and Armen, like I'm not a in deep NBA guy, but I do appreciate and sort of from a distance can understand why the way that the NBA salary rules work kind of generates conversation, gets people interested in sort of being armchair GMs. Can you outline, what you wrote in your piece and kind of describe for us why you think MLS is moving in that direction?
yeah, so I mean, MLS has kind of done a few things to at least like loosen up some spending rules, right? Like I think we've kind of talked about how they're going to capitalize on Messi, how they're going to capitalize on these specific situations with the roster rules. And I think the one thing we've kind of all gone to is, oh, these rules are very confusing, they're very restrictive, etc., which they are, especially when you look at it from the surface, right? But one thing that MLS I think is doing is essentially like think of this whole GAM, this general allocation money that we always kind of talk about and joke about as like cap space. And essentially, they're allowing cap space to be kind of moved on throughout the years. That allows like multi-year roster building, which we haven't seen, right? Because previously, without the GAM, you had to use it or lose it. There was no multi-year spending in that regard. And you kind of see in the NBA, right, where unfortunately it's not the best thing in the NBA because teams are tanking. Like my precious Mavericks now that we traded Luka Doncic and Kyrie blew his knee out, but teams will tank to get better picks, etc. But you can see kind of the ideas of multi-year roster building. In MLS, I'd probably say it's even better, right? Because you're not going to see a team tank for a first-round pick. They're not going to go and get the first overall pick in the draft or anything. You're actually going to see teams instead have maybe younger cores kind of build together and then maybe capitalize on a future season where that core is kind of coming to its fruition. So for me, it's just the multi-year aspect of it, which I thought was really cool and really different of MLS. And plus these roster construction models as well, too. We can talk about like how, teams set up. They can change how they set up. Are they going to go this 2+4, this 3+3? Okay, what's the best way? What's the most optimal way to go about it in their situation? Will they unload players when it's the secondary transfer window and they're out of contention? These players are out of contract and potential to be free agents, like we see in the NBA. So for me, it's a lot of just those characteristics. And the one thing that, one aspect I like about the NBA and a lot of people do is the roster building, is how these things are built out. And for me to see MLS go in that direction is something I've been clamoring for because it just adds another layer of conversation other than what we see on the field.
Yeah, there's not always been a lot to dig into from folks from our perspective, like how do we build narratives, how do we talk about this, and just like the competing within. I think some folks that are skeptics of Major League Soccer have definitely felt that there isn't enough on the line, or they're not actually directly in competition with each other. Obviously, outside of on-field competition. So I guess has this sort of in league competition for the cash for trades, has that led to any sort of like bidding wars? Because I know that's one of the things that Major League Soccer doesn't ever want is teams outbidding each other and spending a ton of money. Has that happened yet here in the early goings of the cash for trades?
It seems like there may have been with Evander. I'm not 100% sure. I mean, there was definitely, from what my good friend Tom Boger always reports, like the conversation between San Jose and FC Dallas for Lucho Acosta. That was one aspect of it. I think there probably will be bidding wars for his cash for player trades. I think there almost has to be. And you have to think about it, like, I guess from a team perspective as too, right? Like, okay, would Portland want to trade Evander? I'm just throwing out a name here to FC Dallas, right? A team that is in their conference that they will face quite a bit throughout the season, et cetera, et cetera. Or would they rather trade him to a team like Cincinnati, like they ended up doing, where they maybe only see him once a year, or if they see him in the playoffs, it'll be an MLS Cup. So I think there will be some sort of like bidding wars. I'm not exactly sure if there has been any at the moment, but I wouldn't be surprised if not, because if you're a team like Portland trying to trade Evander or when they were trying to trade Evander, I'm sure they were asking FC Dallas for a lot more money than they were asking Cincinnati, etc. Because again, just from a competition standpoint, you're not going to trade this guy to someone in your conference that you're directly competing against.
Yeah, look, for people who've been around long enough, and I have a lot of gray in my beard, so you can tell I've been around a long time. The way MLS has moved is kind of stunning. I mean, people are impatient, Armen, and rightfully so. I mean, again, we want MLS to take big leaps rather than little steps. But I remember a time when the idea of free agency was anathema. There was no chance it was ever going to happen because it would break apart the idea of single entity. Now, MLS obviously feels comfortable enough with their single entity legally to move in this direction with inter club competition, as Robert described it. But during that stretch when we were watching the league not allow any competition and we were watching the budget rules kind of turn into this complicated Byzantine mess, a lot of us would say, get rid of all this. It makes it too difficult for fans to engage with the league when you're saying, well, what kind of allocation money do I have, and how many player slots can, and why does that team have a claim on a player they never even made an offer to? Things like that. Strip it all away. Do the same thing as the rest of the world does, which is just basically go out and pay money to buy players and bring them in. And what you're saying is that you think there's actually value as in terms of building narratives and selling the league in having a not necessarily overly complicated, but having a system like this that is kind of like the NBA, because it'll bring engagement. Do you see that? Do you hear people say, like, I'm more interested now? Do you think that's really something the league can sell? Because clearly they're not going to drop salary budgets and just allow teams to spend whatever they want.
Right. I kind of see it with some of the conversations I've been having with people randomly, like, oh, wow, Miami, because MLS is publicly releasing the GAM numbers. They released it in December. And people are like, oh, wow, Miami actually has X amount of allocation money or something. That's very interesting. What moves can they make? Oh, these slots are open. What moves can they make? I think Seattle has 3 U22 initiative spots open. Are they going to promote Obed Vargas to that position, or are they going to bring in players from other leagues? We've seen kind of the conversation I wrote about it, I think this week on my newsletter, about the U22 slots and how they're best optimally used. We didn't know how many spots were being used on each team until last year in 2024 when MLS released their roster profiles. I think you can build narratives, and also it kind of strips away like the cheap narratives, right? Like, okay, like for example, in 2023, like this is before the whole or after the whole Blas Matuidi thing of Miami, everyone's like, oh, Miami's cheating. No way they can afford this roster, whatever. This is impossible or anything. Actually, like, they have a staff, they have a group that has helped them get to this point, and now we publicly can see how they got to this point. They can kind of show their work. I still think there are, Jason, some rules that are a little kind of confusing and whatnot. And for me, I think there needs to be like, for example, like this whole TAM, target allocation money, like get rid of it. Get rid of it. Just make it all GAM, make it all cap space, and go from there.
Well, let me kind of like build on that a little bit, because again, you're an NBA guy, so you come at this kind of from that perspective of, okay, the NBA uses these rules. I think they're interesting. They make playing armchair GM fun,
right?
But there are lots of soccer fans who are only soccer fans, or who see see Major League Soccer through the prism of what other leagues and other places are doing. Do you think soccer fans are amenable to this kind of thing, or are soccer fans a different kind of sports fan who would just love it to be stripped down and be just spend dollars?
I think the non-American sports fan, I think, is going to be extremely confused by this whole concept. And I think, although we are seeing in Europe, like with some of the cash flow rules and whatnot, and especially like La Liga, right, where they have like salary caps like being implemented. So I think the European fan will be very kind of confused by it, or I guess the non-American. But I think the American soccer fan will understand it because of, if they follow other leagues, the salary cap mechanisms are in other leagues, right? NFL, every league we know has a salary cap thing except for MLB. And I think when it comes to that, I think I think it'll be a little bit easier to understand. I still think it won't be as clear and as like obvious as maybe another group. But yeah, I think for me, it's It's tough, Jason. I completely get what you're saying because you're right. There is no cap, even though I think Europe is starting to go in that direction of a salary cap and and whatnot.
Yeah, laying that over the top of what they historically have done is going to be difficult. That's an adjustment for people, and people understand the point of like PLS, which is not the same thing exactly as what we're talking
Right.
about, but it's hard to kind of follow all the intricacies of it. And obviously, PLS is a little less transparent, a little bit more opaque. Before we run out of time with you, Armen, I do want to ask you about another piece on your Substack, which is about the U22 initiative and how clubs are approaching their signings. Outline for us a little bit, your thoughts about approach here, because you identify, some clubs are looking outside the league, and maybe you go and you bring in a young player who's got all this upside, but what tends to happen, or what seems to be a regular trend, is those players aren't breaking into lineups and contributing a lot. Meanwhile, some other clubs are thinking, let's go get some proven MLS players and bring them in as U22 initiative players and give ourselves a little bit more room when it comes to the cap.
My favorite thing about the U22 initiative rule, guys, is that you can be on this until the year you turn 26. So that's how the Galaxy took advantage of it, utilized the rule to have Dejan Joveljic as a $200K cap hit, even though they paid a multi-million-dollar transfer fee for him. His budget charge should have been a lot more, but he only hit the cap at $200K until the year he turned 26, which was the 2025 season. That's why they had to trade him to Sporting Kansas City. Look, I really like the U22 initiative in theory. I think in theory, you in a perfect world, you can spend as much as you want on the transfer fee as long as they fall between a certain amount on their salary below the max budget charge. And then from there, you can use it as almost a discretionary spot of sorts. The problem is you don't have that much data on a lot of players that are young, right? Like if you're like 20, 21, like you don't have that much data on them. You're kind of just throwing a dart and seeing if it's going to hit. I mean, look at the latest. I don't know if you've ever seen Dallas, but Dallas's $4 million signing of Kaique, the center mid from Gremio. He has one first-time appearance with Gremio. If you look at the data on him, there's not much about it. That's a risk. It's going to be an inherent risk. But if you look at how Colorado has been building their U22s, they got Ted Pietro, they got Josh Atencio, they have Cole Bassett, who they brought back. These guys have established data. They have numbers that you can see, and you can take a much better educated guess on these guys. Or a guy like Brian Gutierrez from the Fire. Like, you know how this guy's going to be off the field. You saw him grow in the academy. He's played with you in the first team as well. And now you're going to promote him by giving him a U22 deal. For me, I see like the domestic player has been utilized in the way that I think it should have been, because a lot of teams kind of see this as, oh, we'll spend whatever and, get whatever U22 player and we'll see what happens. And if he hits, he's going to be amazing. We'll sell him for whatever and call it a day. But for me, guys, from a competitive standpoint, what players are going to make the most impact? Is it going to be immediately? Is it going to be a 19 or 20-year-old that's coming in potentially from a different country, having to learn the language, having to acclimate? That's a really tall ask a player. And then you slap on a multi-million-dollar transfer fee. There's going to be expectations, right? Should there be? I mean, that's a whole other discussion, but there is going to be expectations from fans, from ownership, from a coaching staff. Okay, this guy can compete. Why not make that educated guess, not for all the slots, but why not make the educated guess for maybe 2 of the slots or 3 of the slots or 1 of the spots even? Like, it just, to me, like the way it's being utilized, like I just don't think it's been being done in the exact best way, because again, it's just dart throws. And some of them hit. Look at Miami. Miami's been, I think, hitting almost every single one. Diego Gomez's sale to Brighton. That's an amazing hit. I mean, the Galaxy hit after years with Dejan Joveljic. I mean, keep in mind, they got him, I think, 2021, and he was able to be on the U22 deal until this 2025 season. So it can take time. But for immediate results, I really like what Colorado is doing in acquiring proven players to come slot into their lineup, like Atencio, like Cutie Pietro.
Yeah, that Joveljic deal might be one folks like yourself look back on as a real unicorn, with utilizing that U22 advantage to the most, and then being the first in-league cash trade. One for the MLS roster history books there. But we've come to the end of our time here, Armen. Let the folks know your work is out in a couple spots, so let the audience know where best to find your work.
Yeah, so I'm kind of everywhere. I'm kind of just like throwing around, but you can catch my work on Backheeled, Joe Lowry, great site. Do a little work on there. I also have my own podcast called The Hex with John Arnold and Daniel Robertson that comes up Mondays or Tuesdays. And also my Substack, Footy Analytic Musings. I think we just had a post go live Right now, MLS actually just, I think, released updated allocation money totals. So another step in transparency for the league, but you can find my work all through there and on Blue Sky as well at Armen Kafai.
Well, thank you so much, Armen, for joining us here on Morning Kick Around. Go check him out, guys. And if you've been tuning in and you haven't hit subscribe yet, be the next to subscribe. We've crashed through the 1,000 subscribe mark, and we're working towards 5,000. Big thanks to Armen there. Good stuff on the MLS roster building. And one thing before we go that I wanted to mention, it is a big week for me. The USL 2 schedule came out, so the plans for my summer have become apparent with that. So anyone who's into the summer soccer scene in USL 2, congratulations, for the 2025 soccer schedule is here, and you may prepare accordingly. Subscribe to the Morning Kick Around YouTube if you haven't already. You can write us a note at morningkickaround@gmail.com. Follow us on social media on the X, the Instagram, or the Blue Sky. The followers are starting to really rack up there on the Blue Sky. That's fun. Keep on doing so there, folks. And then also, if you have some change rattling around in your pocket or folded up down your couch cushion, send it our way. Ko-fi.com/morningkickaround. You got any final words here on Friday, Mr. Davis?
No, and thank you very much to Armen Kafai. Thank you to everybody who watched us live. Tell people about the live show. Love to get that engagement a little bit higher for our live show. And hit as Nicholas Murray says, hit the like button, trigger the algorithm. That should be our mantra here. Trigger the algorithm for Morning Kick Around. Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, put that on the badge of your created team. Trigger the algorithm. Put that in Latin, too. All right, guys, your morning's been kicked. We'll see you on Monday. Enjoy your soccer.